Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the next generation of e-commerce, sponsored by Pivotree, Syndigo, and SAP. I'm Tom, the webinar coordinator for Online Retail Today, and I'm excited to bring you this brand new session with well-earned insight about the modernization of e-commerce tech and the changing consumer landscape. I'm really looking forward today to talking with a panel of incredible speakers, Jenn VandeZande, Beth Scott, Nikki Grigsby, and Levana Wang, in what I'm sure will be a fascinating and amusing conversation. Also, we will be recording this webinar in case you have to leave early. We're going to be sending the link to the landing page in the chat box right now. So before we go any further, I want to just take a couple of minutes to let everybody trickle in, kind of, find their virtual seats here as we get into this webinar. It's going to be an incredibly valuable discussion today. I want to make sure that no one misses a single minute of it. All righty. So as people are still joining, I think we're going to keep going here just with our little introduction. Welcome everyone today to this incredible session. I want to call out, this is sponsored by three amazing sponsors here, Pivotree, SAP, and Syndigo. We're going to be sending some links to their pages if you want to check them out. I also want to call out, we have a special handout for this webinar all about Gen Z and the next generation of e-commerce. If you want to click in the handout section of your control panel, you should be able to click on it and download it right from there, or it should open up in your browser. Either way, it's going to be amazing. But I wanted to call out these three amazing sponsors here. Now, today I have the great pleasure of talking with four wonderful panelists. We have Nikki Grigsby, Beth Scott, Jenn VandeZande, and Levana Wang. I'm going to get out of the way and let them introduce themselves. I think we'll start with you, Nikki, since you're on the left, and then we'll kind of move down all the way to Levana.
Awesome, thank you so much. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. First off, on behalf of myself and the panel, thank you for choosing to spend the next hour with us. My name is Nikki Grigsby. I have the privilege of leading Syndigo's operations teams as the Chief Operations Officers. This is a talented team that delivers outcomes and enables all of our customers through their entire customer journey, from onboarding to implementation, support, success, and all of the data and content operation that goes into that. Overall, I'm super passionate about everything that is involved in leadership, empowerment, culture, and DE&I, which is very timely for the world that we're living in. These are all must-haves in life and business, and even more so now where the lines between life and work are blurred more than ever. So thanks again for having me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Beth Scott. I'm the VP of Business Operations at Pivotree in the supply chain org. So we have a couple of different business units. My team specifically helps enable organizations optimize their supply chain through technology. Super excited to be here and to join these lovely ladies in this panel. So thank you again for your time.
Hi, I'm Jenn VandeZande. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Future of Commerce for SAP and also the head of digital engagement for SAP Customer Experience. And I'm also really thrilled to be here and excited about the topics today. So thank you for the offer.
Hi, I'm Levana. I am an actress, producer, content creator, and TikTok lover. And I am Gen Z myself. So I would say I'm a Gen Z expert. I graduated from the University of Michigan last year, go Blue, and now I am currently in New York filming for an Apple TV show. So I'm happy to be here with these people, and I'm excited to get this show on the road.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Yeah, I am so excited to talk to all of you today. An amazing swath of experience that we have here and different perspectives. The first question that I want to get into, diving straight into it, is this. What is the next generation of users and what are they looking for in e-commerce? Jenn, why don't we start with you?
Thanks. So the next generation of users is Gen Z and along with millennials as well. So they make up about 38% of the workforce right now. Fascinating about Gen Z, they've always grown up with a phone in their hands, right? So some of us Gen Xers and others in the business grew up on that bridge of the digital divide where, I don't know, an email was a new thing, but not anymore. So they know how to use digital, and that's primarily what they use. They especially recognize the power of social media. So they've never not had social media in their lives, which has been had a tremendous impact on e-commerce and commerce in general with regard to purchasing, as well as decision making. So the buyer journey has changed as well. What's really fascinating to me, we just ran an article and it said that 73% of digital natives are responsible for product and service decisions within their business, and it's the fastest growing, segment within B2B. I think that's really fascinating to know. And they're also really into product reviews, right? So they're doing their own research. They've always had every answer that they wanted in the palm of their hands. So they do their own research, and before they reach out for a sale, by the time they reach out, they've probably already decided, these are the contenders, which has really changed the concept of business itself. And they're incredibly purpose driven, which I admire greatly. So I think Gen X was kind of the first angst generation, right? But to see the people that we've raised coming up and be driven by values, I think that's fascinating on how it affects commerce and business today.
Beautiful. I would love to hear more, Nikki, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I'd love to. So completely agree with Jenn on that. The next generation is definitely Gen Z. And they're really active consumers, as Jenn just highlighted. They tend to be mobile first, and they really never have been without the internet. And they also have an estimated buying power about $140 billion. They're, as Jenn kind of again mentioned, they are set to have a really deep connection to brands. For them, it's way more than just a label. It's really about what those values are, which means that the products that they buy really have to live up to whatever that image is that the brand also puts out. And since they buy through some of the same platforms that they're social on, like Instagram and TikTok, then they can also put out the word out very quickly, good or bad. And research also shows that after friends and family, it's really those online influencers that they follow that they're their trusted source for product recommendations. Now, in my household, I also have a couple of young Gen Zs, and I will say that TikTok is probably their first choice before they even talk to family. And so really, what does that mean then for commerce as a whole is that, they have to operate seamlessly really across online and physical platforms. And for brands and retailers, it means that customer experience needs to be really consistent. So everything from the amount and quality of the images all the way to the actual content that they're reviewing and sharing. And then on the e-commerce side, it means that they need to have the brand really the promise of the brand really fulfilled. So things like reliable delivery and really an easy and effortless shopping experience. So I think it's important to remember that their behaviors also apply to more basic things in life. It's not just around the latest trend or fashion. Gen Z does spend about 70% of their monthly food budget on groceries, and they also do visit grocery store about 3 times a week on average. So they are looking for variety. They're looking for brand connections. They're looking for trusted products, and they're really still sourcing them in some of the more quote unquote old-fashioned ways as well. So it's really a reminder that the in real life part and experience really needs to also align with what they experience online too.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we'll keep talking about that too. Levana, I want to also ask you, you're a member of Gen Z. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I am. And, to be honest, I'm not mad about it. It makes my life easier. When I go on TikTok, I see people make a review. They take out their phone, they talk about how they feel about this product. And if they're like, I love it, they'll probably show how they use it too. So not only do I get a review, I also get a whole entire user manual that comes with it. So then, of course, I'm going to want to buy it too, right? So what happens often is these influencers or people we see on TikTok will link what they've bought in their bio, and that link links to an Amazon storefront. So it's for users with over 10K followers on social media. They can link their items, and then we can buy directly off that link. So what this does is that it makes it easier for us. It's simple, it's efficient, we're on the go, so when we can just click things and click buy, that's what we like. The easier that e-commerce can be for us, the better. Now, I would say another layer of it is that the next generation, we do want to consume from brands, companies we feel aligned to. We feel really here's our values, right? So for example, we might choose to shop from a small business instead of Amazon. And this might take out the idea of ease and simplicity, right? But that is what we will do to go to lengths for things we truly care about, right? And we see this idea of ethics become more and more vital to how one makes decisions, not only in life, but also when it comes to shopping.
That's fantastic. I love having your perspective on this from a first-person point of view. I love that we're talking a lot about, kind of, what Gen Z is looking out for and what Gen Z, sort of responds the best to. And it flows really well into our next question here. How can e-commerce organizations anticipate these needs, and how is tech adapting? In respect to that, actually, Beth, why don't we start with you and answer this question?
Thanks, Tom. I think that of the, as these lovely ladies pointed out, Gen Z wants to connect to brands that are meaningful for them and have from a values and ethics perspective, but also while getting products and services accurately and quickly. So these two needs create an interesting intersection between both commerce and supply chain, where consumer-driven omni-channel capabilities and customer experience place a strain on the global supply chain and ultimately the environment. So as you get things faster, the environment suffers to some degree or to a lot of degree, depending on where that product is coming from. And as those Gen Z voices rise up, including Levana's, the demands that brands are being held to are higher from both an ethical and an environmental perspective. So these companies need to look to the future and make social and environmental standards a priority for their organization and for their brand overall. So this is a journey, not a destination by any stretch. So it will take a long time to get there. And then when you get there, you're not actually there, because those standards and the demands and the expectation of the world will be constantly evolving. And so you need to build that into your organization and that muscle of always continuously improving in these areas. So one of Pivotree's customers, which is a pretty cool fashion retailer in South Africa, embodies a lot of the points that we're talking about. So a few years ago, they actually built a local manufacturing facility in South Africa. So a lot of their product is done overseas or in Asia, like that's where it's manufactured. But what they recognized is that when products were very popular, they wanted a way to fulfill those products in a faster way, but also give back to the community that's helped grow them. So what they've done is they've taken high demand products and they manufacture them in a local manufacturing facility that they've built. And what that has done is it's actually ingested into the economy and employment opportunities for the South Africans that actually support the brand and actually purchase from the brand. They've taken that one step further, and they're now launched a facility that is for the hearing impaired. And they've actually created special facilities for it. They've partnered with a school of the deaf that's local. They've also placed that extra manufacturing facility in a rundown adjacent area to help revitalize that community. So they're making very specific decisions as an organization that not only gives back to the community, supports the environment because your supply chain is less when you're shipping from a local manufacturer, and providing injection points into the economy itself. So this example really helps people kind of focus on like making it more of a broad approach when they're thinking about how they can improve and how they can respond to the demands of the Gen Z in the future. In 2021, like 157 billion parcels were shipped. Now, COVID had a huge impact on the numbers there, but that's expected to grow to 160 billion this year. And then looking into the future in 2026, you're looking at 266 billion packages. That's a lot of product flying around our world. Using technology, brands can actually improve the environmental impact that this has in many ways. And I'll just give you a couple quick examples. So the first one is you can adopt a smarter and more greener approach to transportation. So there's technology, there's platforms, there's AI and machine learning that can help your systems make smart shipping decisions that makes sure that the environment is protected. So shorter routes, consolidating packages together, and making it a very environmentally conscious logistical plan when you're shipping or moving product around the world. You can also empower your consumers to make green buying decisions. So a lot of times when I shop online now, you're seeing retailers provide you multiple options from a shipping perspective. Those multiple options include things like maybe paying less for a shorter time, or not even giving them a deadline of when they have to ship something to you. So time in transit has a direct relationship to environmental impact. So the faster you want your product, the worse it is for the environment, because it takes a lot. What'll happen is that they'll ship something right away and not consolidate package together. You can also allow consumers to start aggregating products together. So think about maybe extending buyer remorse periods, or creating a user experience that allows consumers to add products to the order if it hasn't shipped. So I ordered a shirt from X retailer yesterday. It hasn't shipped yet. I ordered something else this morning because I found something else I like. Having that system automatically detect that, listen, you have an unfulfilled order, can I put them together? And away we go. At one point, I ordered 6 products from Amazon. All 6 of those products arrived in different oversized boxes by different carriers on different days. That has a massive environmental impact in the world.
Awesome. I love that. I know that green buying decisions is such a huge part of this conversation. I do want to direct this question to Jenn for the tech side of things. Jenn, what do you think?
Yeah, I think tech plays, as Beth said, a huge role in being able to improve the environment, but that's really only if we actually have that ingrained within the companies themselves, more than a talking point, but actually, within the policies. So using technology to tie together the customer experience, the omni-channel, like Nikki said, everything needs to be seamless. But that means, if you order something and it gets delivered and the delivery person throws it and it gets smashed, they don't care who delivered it. It's your brand that's responsible. So you need to be sourcing with partners, and making sure you're staying on top of that. You can use technology to tie that together, but also technology to understand what your suppliers, what your partners, how they're sourcing products as well. So I think tech is helping to be able to gather that data and then use that data for good. There's no point in collecting data unless you're actually using it. And I think today we're at a really interesting inflection point. So we have all of this data. Everybody is in a 24/7, I want it now world, but the world is kind of burning down around us because of that. So I think tech can help us kind of point out, make those intuitive decisions within UX design. You can have everything shipped, it'll arrive in one package, as Beth was saying. But also tech is helping to adapt the workforces and the rules that kind of govern the workforces, right? So technology makes it capable for employees to talk more openly about items within a company that we might not have talked about before openly. So it's been really interesting to watch that evolve. And I think that the biggest enabler for tech is, the tech for good, being able to track using AI, ML, and have that customer experience so you know exactly what the customer is looking for. And then I think you're going to see brands also taking on the responsibility of explaining, the benefits of maybe not getting it tomorrow, right? Or like Levana said, going to a small business owner versus ordering it offline. And that's something that generationally I see in our house too, right? It's like, well, I could have it tomorrow. You could, but then there's this. So I'm actually, Levana, I'm excited for the end of to talk to you about kind of how you balance that, or how you see your peers balancing those two very different worlds that you've been brought up in, right? The expectation of everything at your fingertips versus what the outcomes of that is. So.
Right.
Yeah, I love that. I'm sure we'll be diving, a lot more into that. I do want to transition now to our next question here, which is, practically the whole enchilada, if not most of the enchilada. This question is, what can e-commerce organizations do to actively integrate passion, ethics, sustainability, DEI, and accessibility into their practices? These are the things that are mattering to Gen Z. I want to get to everyone here, but why don't we start with Nikki to kick us off?
Sure, yeah, I love this question. I love this question because it's thought-provoking, and ultimately because it's about really working human and thinking through the lens of it being really a global citizen. So I'm going to try and answer this like in two parts. So one is, what are some of our own processes internally at Syndigo, and what do we do as an organization? But then also, how do we use tech to also, from a business perspective, to support the needs of our customers? So from an internal perspective for us, when we think about all of those things, it has to be from an end-to-end experience. So from anything from recruiting and hiring all the way to our company culture. And more than ever, and these are things that Levana and my other panelists also touched on, like more than ever, it's really important that we are really walking the talk, and that is a requirement. It's really not a nice to have. Now, as a company, as Syndigo ourselves, like we have grown nearly 10 times in employee size in the last 5 years through acquisitions and growth. And what this has done, it's brought like a lot of different cultures, a lot of different people, a lot of different countries into our organization, which is really a beautiful thing. So we are diverse. Now, I'm sure as we've all heard the quote, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And so we also want to make sure that we are focusing on both, that we are being inclusive, and that we will continue to do that as we constantly look at our policies, our procedures, at just the environment and the culture that we build. Like what Beth was saying, it's really the journey. It's not a one and done kind of thing. And so as we continue to grow, it's also been really important to us to drive forward our values and just make sure that they are embedded in how we work together, how we operate. And so our values are things like passion, authenticity, collaboration, empowerment, innovation. Again, for this to also work, it can't be something that is driven by HR. It cannot be words on a poster. It cannot be words on paper. It really needs to be demonstrated by every single part of the organization, starting from the executive team all the way through how we work together and, again, make decisions. We're also really proud to offer 2 days a year for our employees to have time out of the office for volunteer projects that they feel really passionate about. This is in addition to any other PTO, and we do it because we recognize that, again, from a work human perspective, our employees have causes outside of work that they care about, and we want to make sure we're doing our job in elevating and supporting that. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm really, really passionate about DE&I. We do have DE&I programs and initiatives, and better yet, we have really passionate associates that give their time to the programming, that have some of those conversations that Jenn was talking about, that sometimes in the past have not been really easy conversations, or conversations that are really being held openly, and they are really facilitating that type of environment. So again, an area that we're going to continue to work and focus on. Now, from a tech and a business perspective, buyers, and particularly Gen Z, really wants to have a really immersive e-commerce experience, and they want to be captivated. And so we also don't want to leave anyone behind there either. So we want to make sure that we are taking the data experience and really making it a universal experience. So with that, what we've been really focusing on is identifying and executing on a lot of initiatives that really address the heart of the DE&I challenge as it relates to content curation and how it's disseminated. Now, the reality is a source of the project, beyond just doing the right ethical thing, is also making sure that we are enabling our solutions to address the growing needs of our suppliers and our recipients, to really conform to web content accessibility guidelines, and to meet the short-term and long-term goals that are related to making the web, again, a more inclusive space. So examples include things like video captioning, making sure that there is translation of attribute values between languages, and capturing a number of the sustainability related attribution in our data capture. So things like, what the manufacturers provide on the package, third-party certifications of sustainability, because what we are seeing is that there's an increased focus on these in the e-commerce space. Retailers want to share this information online because our consumers, their consumers, are demanding it, and they're making purchase decisions that is really based on that sustainability question. So, what we're seeing is that ultimately people want to make really informed choices, and they want an experience that is tailored to their needs, and those needs can really truly change on a daily basis. And so we are continuously thinking about how do we keep thinking through that, and how do we make sure that that is something that we enable through our technology, but also through our company culture as well.
I love that. I love that a lot. Levana, I want to switch to you now, or sorry, Levana, to get your perspective, again, from the Gen Z perspective, like why are these things important, et cetera. I would love to hear from you.
Yeah. Well, I think in recent years we've witnessed historical moments, right, in culture that have really shifted the way that we view the world and our own ethics and our own beliefs and the ways in which we act on our own ethics, right? And one of those ways is in the way that we shop. So, like earlier, I was talking about small businesses, but also it's more than just small businesses. It's that we want to support any business that also supports the cause that we care about, but also sells the product that we want. So that means we need to see action from these businesses when they support the causes we care about, right? Not just performative activism, which we see a lot of recently. We want to see true action being taken against previously ingrained trains of thought, because as Gen Z, we will not be blind to performative activism. We've seen it so much that we can just call it out in an instant. And what we're seeing is that many companies have a tendency to make political statements for the public eye rather than for real change, because they are afraid of being canceled. And cancel culture is really big right now as well. So a lot of companies are doing things to avoid being canceled rather than because they actually care. And that doesn't fool anyone, especially not Gen Z. So it's more than just an Instagram post. We want to see the efforts put in, consistent donations to organizations that are initiating change, enforce company education on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, increase in diverse representation among employees, while also including them in the dance, like Nikki said. And we also want ongoing conversations about these issues in our society. So we want to push these issues out. We want to talk about them, right? So that we can desensitize the stigma around mental health or around whatever is going on. We need to have these uncomfortable conversations. And when a company begins to make these internal changes for their own growth, it will become evident in an organic way to the public. But again, the goal is never to satisfy the public or impress the public. It's about the company genuinely seeking justice themselves and taking actions that, may not always be broadcasted to the public, but are actions that are truly needed in our day and age to move forward.
I love that. Yeah, definitely, hitting on that point of authenticity, like we really can anticipate, or Gen Z can really anticipate if it feels like it's performative, like you were saying. Beth, next, I really want to get to your perspective on this too.
Awesome. I'm going to go in a slightly different direction, I think, in my answer. There's been a lot of disruption in the world, especially in recent years with COVID and other environmental impacts, disaster, climate change, and so forth. And organizations have had to focus on technology to adopt and mitigate risk around their supply chain, but also meet omni-channel consumer demand, but also in order to enable some of the things that both Levana and Nikki were talking about, like how do they create an authentic self, how do they hold themselves continuously accountable for things, how do they make their products and their technologies accessible to the greater population in the world. A customer-centric supply chain is very data-driven, it's intelligent, it's responsive to customer needs. A recent Gartner report, it talks about 83% of companies demand that supply chains improve consumer experience. And as part of that, it's a big part of the digital strategy within their organization. And with massive amounts of data intelligence and integrity around things like product reviews, availability, sentiment, and now adding into that some of the things that Nikki and Jenn and Levana have all been talking about how do you incorporate environmental, social governance, the integration of passion and ethics and sustainability. It should be just a focus overall for all organizations, and they need to actively demonstrate it in an ongoing way. And there's also there's government implications. Like there's lots of compliance and sustainability standards that are being launched worldwide, and it's important for companies to understand their part and do more than what is legislated them to do. So when you look at like DE&I and accessibility, and I chair our DE&I committee at Pivotree, it's an important conversation that we have regularly within our organization, and we're constantly thinking about how DE&I and accessibility for our workforce, who, like Nikki, we're continuing to grow with expansion and bringing new companies into the fold. That next generation of users, and as they start entering to the workforce of, that are hyper-focused on social responsibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as we all should be, really, they need to support, and organizations need to support these initiatives in a competitive marketplace now and for generations to come. So we have a generation that's putting a lot of pressure. That pressure is not going to be alleviated by the next generation by any stretch, or the generations that come after it. So let's take accessibility as an example. We work with a lot of customers to ensure that their digital content is accessible, and a lot of the things that Nikki was talking about, it holds true. Like, how do you make sure that digital content is actually accessible to everybody in the world in a way that's meaningful for them? So there's lots of technologies that can support that, and there's organizations that can help, like including Syndigo and Pivotree. But the best technology goes beyond just automating things, right? Like, you have humans, again, like the two organizations I mentioned, who think about accessibility and make sure that they're available to consumers who are using them. So there's actually services out there that employ people with disabilities, or to test websites and to test content to make sure it is actually accessible. And they will evaluate everything from things like color blindness to mobility issues, and it's things that you don't think about, right? Like, a lot of times accessibility is thought about as maybe, just somebody who's maybe vision impaired, but there's lots of different accessibility issues and barriers that we put up in the world and we don't even think about it. So, like, just take a CAPTCHA, for example. So that really annoying thing that checks to see if you're a bot when you go to a website, that is not accessible in any stretch. A lot of them require you to do extra clicks that maybe somebody with mobility issues wouldn't be able to navigate. There's also situations where it uses images that are grainy and poorly placed or out of context. And even people from maybe different countries that don't recognize what the picture is, it doesn't represent something that they can pass. So even individuals who maybe don't have a disability can have difficulty accessing or navigating a CAPTCHA, but yet we keep putting CAPTCHAs in front to stop bot, or to weed out bad bot traffic, but we're also weeding out a big portion of our population globally. So organizations as a whole need to really build their technology strategy around the concept of customer experience, which includes accessibility, sustainability, and DE&I. And we've helped customers do that, but it's really about starting with your brand, your organization, and setting the standards that this is important and prioritizing it for your company.
Beautiful, excellent. Jenn, I would love to get your perspective on this question before we move on.
Yeah, so kind of taking it back to the question is how you actually actively integrate these things within your company. And that can be, for us, we have a huge company, right? Or it can be a smaller company that's a startup. But I think the most important thing is exactly what Nikki said, like, the talk has got to meet the walk, from how you treat employees, how you hire employees, how you consider the employee hiring process. We're looking at AI that has been proven time and time again to be biased. Looking at, do you need 4 years of college versus maybe some experience? There's certification programs that SAP, Google, Microsoft are all doing where, you can, and rather than attending college and getting a 4-year degree, you can take part in a 2-year program and get certification to be able to work at those companies. Thinking about actively what you can do for the next generation, because coming out of college with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, not a great experience, and you can see how that is affecting the world. So it's being active and showing how you're taking that stand, and again, day after day. It's also enforcing the policies within. So if you see bad behavior, we talked a little bit about how employees are more open to calling it out. It's now on leadership to genuinely take a stand against that behavior, or I think you'll see a cultural swing within the company of loss, not necessarily leadership, right, but of the talent below it. And you need to be able to integrate exactly authenticity by being authentic and by doing those things. We saw one of the favorite articles I've read has been, I've been writing about diversity and inclusion for a long time, but when Great Britain forced employers to publish the wages of their employees, right? It showed that there was 49% hourly wage gap, but a 72% gap in the bonuses. And a reporter had written, if you haven't looked at it, be prepared for your eyes to pop out of their sockets. So I think employers need to think about these things beforehand, and they're going to just have to simply enforce or legislate these policies for change to happen, because we can see in many places government is not following the will of the people, and it's really up to companies to be able to do that so that they'll be able to retain customers and talent and be relevant in the future.
I love this. I love that so much. I want to transition now to this last question here. I want to make sure we get into this question, and then we're going to go into audience Q&A. Go ahead and everyone get your questions in while we have our amazing panelists here. We'll be sure to bring them up. But I want to transition now because we've been talking a lot about this, but what practices and approaches specifically can e-commerce organizations expect to abandon or adopt with the upcoming landscape in 2022? This is kind of, overall summary of a lot of the things that we've been talking about, how we can tie it all together. Why don't we start with Levana this time?
Cool. So I'm going to be talking about more so what you can do on a personal level, because it's one thing to take action because your company tells you to do so, and then it's another thing to take action because you personally do care. And then I think the latter is more effective to not only the e-commerce organization you're a part of, but also to the world we're a part of. So there is this idea that ethics is what you do when no one is watching, right? And like we touched on earlier, we as a society need to do things for our own terms rather than for the image that we give off to the public. Now, what does this mean? This means that we are constantly aware and educated of the issues that plague our society before they become breaking news. We need to be proactive instead of waiting for an explosion that finally makes us go, oh, we should do something about this. So, for example, with the recent Texas shooting, that was an explosion that finally made many companies, people open their eyes and take action. But it should not take this long, right? It's obvious that prior to this moment, there have been multiple instances of gun violence, Buffalo last week. But the sad thing is, it takes some big deadly shootings like this for people to take action, to speak up. And the thing is, we need to be constantly with the times. We need to do what we got to do before these unfortunate instances happen. So educate yourself, read the books, read the news, call your representatives. Don't just be scrolling on Instagram and seeing these horrific acts and, just turn a blind eye. We don't want to desensitize ourselves. And sure, you can post your sympathetic views about what has happened. Why not? But also donate, read, have these conversations, and open the door for those you don't know to lend your ear to truly listen to what they have to say. And as an e-commerce organization, you really do have the power to set the precedent for change, whether that's sharing resources that have helped your company grow or changing your internal policies to be reflective of the values of DE&I. And it's vital that something is done, little by little. Everything helps because you do have more influence than you think. And we as consumers, we as people, we follow you and we buy from you.
Absolutely, yeah. Can't necessarily, hide this or sweep it under the rug, and pretend it doesn't exist. I would love to get Jen's perspective next.
Thanks. So Levana is 100% right. Talking about the news this week, I was one of the first members of Moms Demand Action. So that was founded after Sandy Hook. And I will say that one of our strategies was to actively attend the board meetings of companies where we were grocery shopping, right? If they weren't changing their policy because we saw that legislation wasn't going to move. And you can see more commerce and e-commerce companies picking up on these kind of things ahead of time. They won't allow people to sell certain items on their platforms. So as we're waiting for legislation to happen, the people are actually driving change actively. And you can see companies both reacting reacting to it, but then also now getting out in front of it and taking a strong stand. I think that's something that companies will have to be looking at as a baseline for the future, because technology hasn't just leveled the playing field, you know, for companies competing where you can do business with anybody, anytime, also for employees and talent where they're going to want to work. And it's not just B2C. I think that's really important, right? When we're talking about e-commerce now, really everything is kind of e-commerce, including B2B. And those decision makers and buyers also expect the exact same experience, no matter what they're buying. You're usually buying it online. So they want that exact same experience and those exact same ethics baked into who they're doing business with, because they are going to be the decision makers here really soon. So that, I think that's important for people to understand and remember. And I do think, you know, you're going to need, instead of looking at, a lot of companies look at social media as, oh, well, you're a content writer, you can just go ahead and write this post, right? And put it across these networks. It's going to take more than that. You're going to have an integration of teams in companies so that your product people are talking to the people who are publishing things on the web or your social posts, so that everything is really and truly baked in authentically across the entire business. And I think companies should absolutely plan on that as they're building in the future.
Another fantastic answer. So many salient points there to keep in mind. I want to now go to Nikki, I think, to wrap up this question.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't really agree more with anything that everybody has said up to this point. You know, I do think, like, when it comes to company culture standpoint, it really doesn't matter if it's an e-commerce company or really any other type of company. And I think, you know, some of the things that both Jenn and Levana hit on is that, you know, is the fact about, while as a business we have an obligation to our customers and a customer experience, we also have an obligation to our associates and our employee experience. And it is ultimately really our employees that are providing that experience to the customers. So, you know, when Levana shares about, like, making sure that there is a personal care, like, I think it's really important for companies to have that personal care for their employees as well. And the reality is, we are also in a time where, you know, business is becoming more and more transparent, and there's just like a lot of immediacy and a lot of scope, and social media is a big player in that. So again, it goes back to that walk the talk, say and do. Those ratios have to be 100%, because not only will the wonderful Gen Z people like Levana hold us accountable, but we're now in also a situation that every generation will, because it is allyship. It is a situation where we all care about the greater world and the greater culture that we live in and that we have an influence to be able to create. Now, Jenn also touched on, you know, B2B than B2C. We are also more B2B than to B2C, and Jenn kind of covered what that looks like from a customer perspective, but also, like, from just an associate perspective. You know, again, we have amazing associates at Syndigo, and we're constantly putting ourselves out there to also continue to hire amazing people. And what happens when you're hiring amazing people that are high ethics, they're going to want to know where you stand. So that means, again, that our culture and our actions have to, again, be really consistent. And we have to have the courage to continue to have the discussions that are sometimes difficult and sometimes frustrating, but it is, again, those difficulties and that frustration that also will drive the passion to drive change. And so making sure, again, that, you know, from a culture perspective, every part of the organization, but specifically from a senior management perspective, that we make it be a psychologically safe environment where people can bring up the big topics that they need to be talking about, that we need to be, again, caring for our people, that we need to show that we are living up to our value of being authentic. And again, in light of everything that we're talking about, making it okay for our people to know it's okay not to be okay. But as long as, from a culture perspective, we stick together, there's really nothing that we can't accomplish together. But it can't also always be business as usual without talking about the things that get in the way.
That's amazing. So I know that this is our last question, and I think we've learned quite a bit in the session today. And I think one of the key themes is, you know, just how connected this generation is and the generations that will follow. And they are, you know, data-driven, digitally it's bred in them to work in the digital landscape. They're organized, and their ability to communicate globally exceeds anything that we've ever seen in the history of the world. Like, social media has really enabled this generation to demand change, affect change, and like just the velocity of change around things like DE&I, accessibility, sustainability, because of their ability to organize themselves and to get their voices out there in a meaningful way. Social media continues to support their ability to do so, and will continue in the future as new social media platforms launch to address other needs in the market. We'll see that continuing to accelerate. And I think as organizations, we need to continue to hold ourselves accountable internally, both in how we treat our employees, as Nikki and Jenn mentioned very eloquently, but we also need, as an organization, to be supporting change in the world. And I think, like, all of those themes together really are about what we've talked about today. So I think with that, we'll hand it back over to Tom for, I think, Q&A. Tom?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Beth. Now, before we dive into questions, I want to remind everyone that now is the time to get straight from the source insight from our wonderful panelists. Like I mentioned in the beginning, great questions contribute to a great webinar, so please don't forget to submit those questions as we keep going into the next few minutes here. Additionally, we do understand if you need to run, have no fear. Today's session is being recorded and it will be emailed to you in the next 48 hours. But with that, I would love to get into some audience questions here. And this one I want to start off with is really fascinating. I think this can go to any one of our panelists, but it comes from Katrina here. She says, members at my organization tend to label Gen Z and young people as just too sensitive. They only care about being influencers, etc. And it's a very dismissive attitude. So how can we navigate these conversations in a professional setting and maybe convince people of Gen Z's intelligence and impact, that they're inevitably going to have? So I'm not sure who wants to start with this one. It's really open to everyone.
I could start with it and see if Levana agrees. I think that, I guess just show them the data. So the data supports, right there. You really, we can argue with science, but you can't argue with those numbers, right? That is the reality of the business coming up. And I would say that they are actually exactly what we've been messaging about, but maybe the business just hasn't transitioned itself, right? So we talk about those things that we're doing for mental health, or we want people to be sensitive to issues, but to label them that way is a mistake. They are thoughtful. They have been raised amid a very turbulent and difficult time. They're more resilient, strong, and powerful than you know. So I think being dismissive of that, you can approach it internally just with data and with having those conversations. And if it's needed, that you have to drill down on that. You don't allow. That's where we're talking about. You say you have a culture, you have to act on that culture. You don't allow the dismissiveness. That is equity, that is equality, full stop, is by having leadership that will step in and say, that's not what we're doing as a company. That's how you right the ship.
Yeah, that I couldn't agree more, Jen. And I think the other thing that it touches on is, whether we all like to admit it or not, there's times and people will have unconscious bias. And so, like, when I hear that question, it's like, that is bias. Now, whether it's conscious or unconscious doesn't need to be debated. But, if we assume that it's unconscious, it goes back to what Levana shared earlier, and also what Jenn is talking about. It's about education. It's about having those conversations. It's about going to your organization and making sure that there can be a conversation that can be had, even from an education standpoint, around the different generations. Because I think that, that unconscious bias, it's like a big part of DE&I initiatives and conversations that I think has to happen in an organization to, again, not only combat that, but also any other bias that could just be living underneath the layer. And I think if you open up that conversation, then who knows what else could happen and what other conversations it can surface that just, again, makes that entire culture continue to transform and become more employee-centric.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that has been said. I think there's this idea that Gen Z is daunting, and it's why companies or people may not want to hear us out, or they want to push us out, right? Because we challenge the older generation and what they're used to doing and how they operate. And that's scary. People, we don't like change, right? But it's change that we need in order to move forward and to grow this company as well. Also, this idea of influencers, I think, is a really broad term, and oftentimes there is a negative connotation that comes with influencers. But you also have to remember there are so many types of influencers. Activists, in a way, are influencers as well. They are influencing you to take action. So when you think of Gen Z, we can't just all pit them into a one type influencers, for example, the negative connotation of influencers, for example. We have to look at the broader scope of everything they've done and everything that is continuing to be done in order to move us as a generation forward, and also to move us as a whole, companies, older generations, everyone, to allow us to keep going and growing and seeing things out.
I love that. A fantastic perspective there. Definitely, yeah, there are many different kinds of influencers, and I can see, it being sort of a new sort of occupation. We historically have, conservatively tended to reject like new occupations, but then they tend to get normalized. So I love hearing that perspective, Levana. I want to transition now to another question. This one comes from Alan here, and kind of going in the same vein. Alan's question is, do the panelists see DEI, accessibility, ESG, et cetera, as things that we need to hire specific teams for? Or is this something we can address maybe on our own? Alan says, I'm worried we might not have the resources. How about we start with Jenn to answer this question?
I think that's a great question. I think the ultimate goal of all of those efforts, right, are that you eventually don't need them, that those are sourced out, right, because we all do. Those are things that are actually ingrained in the company. I think for bigger organizations, you absolutely have to have, staff hired, specialists for that, who have, and maybe not necessarily the business experience, right, but actually start looking at people who have lived that experience and making sure those employees are reflective of people who have had those experiences. But I think for smaller companies, it's really useful to reach out, maybe even have someone come in to give you their perspective, to do an analysis. So if you don't have the budgeting or staffing to do it, I think there's a lot of people who are quite honestly impassioned enough that would come in to speak to it, and to make sure, I think most important, that you're putting it across the entire org. You're not just putting it on, your marketing org or your content people, right? Again, it's going across the entire organization, from development to supply chain to UX, et cetera, so that those core pieces of culture are actually a part of your workforce and your ethics within the company. I think that's how you can transition those areas. And again, happy to connect folks that have questions or are more interested in that with a lot of people that I'm fortunate to be connected to. So
I think from a Pivotree perspective, we launched our DE&I committee is actually fairly new. It's about a year old in our organization, and the way we approached it is we recruited members from all of our office locations globally. We also looked for members from different backgrounds, gender, countries, different experiences to join the committee. It is a volunteer position. It's chaired by myself at the moment. And what we do is we use the resources we have to build initiatives around improving diversity and inclusion, improving equity within our organization. We recently launched a DE&I committee centered in India. For example, we have a large India component to our workforce. And what we were realizing is that as we were going through DE&I and some of the issues that happen in North America versus India, that we needed an India-focused one because they had a very different perspective on what DE&I and accessibility and things mean. So we've launched a subcommittee for that. We've also launched a women's council inside our organization, all of them driven by very talented people in our company who have an excitement and a desire and a drive to drive change within our company and to make sure that Pivotree is the best place to work as possible. And so that's one thing you can approach. You don't have to launch all of these committees. We started off with one. We've spun out others in the process of a year just based on needs and demand and focus. But having people who maybe even want to just learn more about it, we don't pretend to be experts on the topic. We're constantly learning. As Jenn mentioned, bringing in speakers is one of the strategies that we use, and we center it around key events during the year. So we had a speaker come in for International Women's Day. We're going to do some education around Pride and the LGBTQ plus community. So there's lots of different ways that you could do it, even if you don't have the resources and the budget to achieve your goals.
I love that, and reinforcing this idea that it is possible and it's within reach. It's not something that's impossible, either from a budgetary standpoint or from a changing mind standpoint. I love this question. Unfortunately, I think it looks like that's all the time we might have. I do want to give everyone a chance to address our audience for one final time. I want to thank everyone who attended, who got their amazing questions in. I want to take a second to thank again our sponsors, Pivotree, Syndigo, SAP, and our incredible speakers, Jenn, VandeZande, Beth Scott, Nikki Grigsby, Levana, Wang. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. If you want to send a final remark to the audience, I would love that.
I think it's been a pleasure, and thank you for sharing either your morning or your lunch hour or maybe your evening with us. It's been fun.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again to everyone who attended. I've dropped our panelists' LinkedIn socials and their websites if you want to check out their work, if you want to connect with them over LinkedIn. Thank you again to everyone who attended, and have a great, productive rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.